The team at Fitness Embassy Transform have designed an assessment protocol that will help coaches, parents and young athletes, anything from the age of sort of 9 up to 16 years of age, to start developing awareness regarding their body. One thing that's really important is to understand the perception or the lens to look through in order to understand spatial awareness. Now, the reason why we have designed these free workshops with the team is because we really feel that the way young people are thinking about their bodies and how they participate in sport, they're not understanding the lens of looking at sport in terms of a collection of movement patterns. In understanding that, then they need to develop a self-awareness about their own body in space and therefore know how to actually play on the pitch, on the court and so on. In Australia, we need to raise the awareness that netball, followed by basketball, then finally with soccer, they're your 3 high-risk categories of sports for ACL injuries. Not to mention, we've got to think of, Osgood Schlatters for your basketballers, Sever's disease for your soccer players, and then patella tracking, and then tibialis anterior or your shin splints type of injuries for our young athletes for netball. So I think we have a corporate social responsibility as health professionals and allied health professionals to educate the public as to how their body works. Now, one thing that's very important that we must get across in these face-to-face workshops, this video is simply just to raise awareness that you can think and maybe contact us, and we'd be more than happy to come out to your clubs and run these workshops, like I said, with parents, coaches and the young athletes. And that's because when you go see allied health, it's because you're getting treated or the management of an injury of some sort. One thing that's very important, if you think about sport and the placebo effect in terms of even medication, if you have been screened prior to any injury taking place, one, it will raise conversation in the home. It would also allow that communication between the parent, the child and the coach, that there is a screen to have self-awareness. Now, what that actually happens is that when you actually go onto the soccer pitch, for example, you as an athlete, as a young athlete, feel like they've got one on top of their competitor as well as their teammates because you have been personally screened. Now, the reason why we want to run these free workshops is because people financially do not have the capabilities to get screened because it does take a bit of time and it can be very costly. So if you can do it on a generic scale, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you have been screened of some sort, the child goes, hey, I'm actually at low risk, or I have no risk, or guess what? Just because I have been screened, I'm okay on the pitch, and therefore I know how my body works. So these are the reasons why we want to run these workshops. So today I'm going to take you through a bit of the protocol and how it works. We have designed it ourselves. We've taken a collection of over 20 years of sort of research and development, test and learn type scenarios, and then we've developed this protocol that we think is very important, and it's really easy to follow, and that's what we really like about it. It's got to be very simple. It's got to be a very ticker box and checklist, so then it can be executed. And we do highly recommend that coaches do adopt this, and then they can do it with their young athletes as well. So, just very quickly, for people who are not too sure about major injuries or lower limb injuries that occur in these 3 different sports, is that you've got the ACL, okay, so the anterior cruciate ligament, so you've got the front one and then the posterior one at the back. A lot of these injuries are taking place not because of trauma, and that's what we need to understand here. It's because of a child's inability to either move effectively, not be aware of how to use their body, and therefore change direction the wrong way during agility and therefore power, and therefore the highs and lows that comes with these movement patterns from intense to then relaxation. Intense to relaxation, we change in direction, and then we have injuries, okay? And then you also got some genetic factors as well. So with the ACL, okay, you've got the front ligament and the front ligament, so when you have that sudden change or lateral change in movement, okay, there is a risk where you may have a tear there. If you do incur that type of injury, you're out for a year. And one thing that's important when we speak to these children is that they need to understand what is an injury and what can it do for you. Even though it's a very pessimistic black hat, red hat sort of approach, they need to understand that injury prevention is what's going to make life better and also save a lot of money for parents. The other one would be sort of your Sever's disease, and that's more your Achilles tendon, and that's your overuse. So you're growing at a rapid rate during those adolescent years and young adult years, but also you're playing a lot of muscular sports that is tightening the muscles at the same time. So there's this conflict of interest between musculoskeletal sort of injuries. Then you've got Osgood Schlatter, which is the front of the knee, and that's where the tendon comes, and also through a growth spurt with a lot of jumping, that tendon is in conflict with the other, sort of tendons of the knee, the patella femoral tendon and so on. And things are just not happy. And then you're trying to train, 2, 3, 4 times a week, and then put this trauma on top. And most kids aren't getting treated, or they don't really know how their body works. And that's why these, chronic overuse injuries start to occur. And the thing is, it's very hard to retract from these injuries. Usually it's separation from the sport and reduce the load. And we don't want that in our children, because it just isn't a nice period, especially for parents as well, and for athletes that are up and coming. It can really have a detrimental approach to their outlook on sport and where they're going, and we don't want that. With sort of your runner's injuries, or your ITB syndrome on the side, and also your shin splints. And then we've also got compartment syndrome. So that's when the belly of the calf muscle, or the gastrocnemius, sort of gets such a blood flow that it grows like a balloon from all angles, and then it stops the circulation. Okay, and then your leg feels heavy, you fatigue very quickly, and you simply lose power and strength, and you can't continue playing. And that's a hard one to retract from as well, because it may require injury. So the way we design these workshops, we've put a lot of thought into it, because it is a lot to do with the psychology of sport. And like I said, it is a placebo to some extent. And that's for them to think, hey, I've been screened, I'm okay, so therefore I know how to use my body on the pitch, and therefore I won't get injured. Okay? This is really the purpose of it. You can go anywhere for a screening, but when you've been screened with a tick of approval, in a large setting, then they know, okay, I'm fine. So when the parent walks in with the child, because we do encourage both to come, they will get a card. So either an ectomorph card, a mesomorph card, or an endomorph card. So these 3 cards are what we call somatotypes. Now there's a lot of research and a lot of history that comes from the psychology, also the physicality of somatotyping. And we will screen them very quickly, look at the parent, look at the child, and say, yes, okay, you're an ectomorph, okay? Now the reason why an ectomorph is the tall and skinny sort of type of athlete, and we would screen them all. Mesomorph is the muscular, sort of right in the middle, genetically just very built type of athlete. And then you've got your endomorph, and your endomorph is sort of the athlete that's the stocky and favours a certain particular type of sport. Nevertheless, all 3 will be found within these type of lower limb sports. Even though they genetically may not favour all 3, you will still find them. So it's important. Then what we will do is call a particular team. So let's say the under-10s will come up, and we'll say, okay, let's have a look. Let's line each other from ectomorph through to mesomorph through to endomorph. And the reason why we do that is more for the coaches, and they understand where have you put your positions for your different athletes, and then you realize, okay, we've put our ectomorph up the front, but he needs to work on strength. Then we put our mesomorph or our endomorph in the middle, because he can muscle through in the middle. And then usually you'll have your ectomorph, your taller athletes at the back again. So you go from this high to low pitch. Now that's from a soccer situation. Netball's different, basketball's different again, depending on the type of positions you play. And there is a certain amount of specificity here on the type of athlete. That's very important to raise awareness, because then the child, along with the parent, can relate to that. And then they can talk and say, hey, I didn't know I was an ectomorph, because we both, okay, when I was a kid, I might not look like one now as an adult, but when I was a child, yeah, I was very tall and skinny. So therefore, I should have worked on strength. Whereas the endomorph needs to work on flexibility and mobility. So this is the type of conversation you would start with. So when that parent has that involvement, okay, from a genetic factor, you can take that outside of the free workshop. Then we would then move on to the looking at movement patterns. So I would pick, a couple or a few different kids from different age groups, and I'll say, okay, under 14s, under 15s, and we'll go under 9s. And can you show me a movement pattern or something that you find yourself doing all the time at your sport? So if it is to do with soccer, we might have kicking the ball like so, okay? Now what we will do, let's retrack and break that movement pattern down and say, okay, let's start off with playing ballerinas, where you just open and close. Very different to our open and close the gate, okay? Unless you're really going to stop a ball like that, how often would you use that as opposed to a kick like that, okay? So we do toe taps like so. Now what I would do with the presentation, I have all different athletes at front, I would time that 25 seconds on. Now, the reason why they do that pattern for 25 seconds and then they rest for, say, another 5 to 10 seconds, and then we repeat that 5 times is because you need that 25 with a 5-time turnaround is that you're going to have a neurological adaptation. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. It's okay to get treated, but you must understand the neurological adaptation of all the different movement patterns within your sport. So when I go watch my 5-year-old son play soccer, I look at the field and I go, wow, what a collection of movement patterns. I don't look at it as soccer, but that's the lens that we look through. Okay, so the athletes need to understand that their game is a collection of movement patterns and where their self is in space, okay? So whether it's eyes open, eyes closed, and so on, and that's called proprioception. So when that child starts to understand, hey, I do that in sport, but I also do this in sport, I also do that in sport, then you must retract and put these collection patterns together. 25 seconds on with a 5 to 10 second recovery 5 times. And that's another thing that's really important. Now for the parents sitting there, who can relate to this stuff, I need to bring it to them. And I'll bring a parent up here. I'll say, show me how you sit at work, or let's see how you stand. And I will change their pattern to make sure that they've got a correct stance. And then I'll say, hold that for 25 seconds as well. Now when you do that 5 times, and then you say, now relax, I guarantee you that they will stand or sit better than they did when they first started the actual exercise. So movement patterns, neurological adaptations, very, very important and paramount for these young athletes. So I'll give you an example of the type of protocols that we'll go through. So we'd start out with the somatotyping screening when you walk in. Then we'll do a bit of sort of chalk and talk with the neurological adaptations. I talk about the sort of common lower limb injuries. Then from there, we'll go into the actual screening process, our protocol that we design. Then we'll go into a pre-game, what it looks like for a pre-game warm-up and adaptation. And then you then go to your game, and your coach will then get you ready from then on. But we need to raise awareness that the child and the parent has a responsibility to do work prior to getting to your coach. Okay, we're definitely not replacing coaches. We don't specialize in sport. We specialize in movement. So that parent and the child work together, because remember, psychosomatically, they are now adapted and have one up on top of their competitor. Then they go to the pitch, and then their coach takes over, and then they're ready to go. So as if that doesn't prevent injuries, I guarantee you this will prevent injuries or reduce the amount of injuries on a holistic scale. I would love to see the data of what if a club was to implement this stuff, the before and after over a given year, or I say a 3-year period. We're in this for the long haul, not an overnight thing. And then to finish off, we'll give them a strength program, a very basic or elementary strength program that the child can do at home, and we'll take them and demonstrate how to do it with the children up front. Okay, so we do cover all the domains, and then takes a bit of pressure off some of the coaches. So the first stage is we do a verbal screening. We've got worksheets that the parent will do with the child. Okay, we're empowering the parents for that relationship and for that conversation. Now, very importantly, the main purpose of the initial screening that you would ask the child is that we want to look to see if they've got any previous injuries because of the genetic factor. So in terms of the ACL, if you have a parent or a brother or sister who has an ACL reconstruction, then you are at a higher risk to also have an ACL injury. So that is sort of your red herring, your red flag to say, wow, I'm at risk. So I must be able to strengthen all the muscles leading into that knee joint or that ACL. The other thing is hypermobility syndrome or hypermobility at a lesser extent. So if you look at myself, I can hyperextend my knees. Now, I guarantee you a lot of children can do that. So with hypermobility, I am myself at risk, even though I played a lot of basketball. I wish I was, as a child, educated on this stuff because I was at risk of an ACL injury. Okay, it's just that I sort of phased that out quicker before I took it at a very high level and went more into different sports. So I now realize if I want to go back to recreational basketball, I'm at a very high risk, at least a 60 to 70% risk of an ACL injury because of that hypermobility. So I must work on strength and also adapt that agility, okay, and power for that sport. The other thing is to see if the child is in pain right now. So we ask them usually if they've got a waking pain. Now with waking pain is that if it wakes them up in the middle of the night, you know no-go zone. They're at a high risk already and they need to go see an allied health professional before they even do this screening process. So very fast tracking this next step. Then we do the drop knee test or the knee drop test, and that's when you're standing on a step and then you drop down. And when they drop down, usually they will land quite strong. Okay, but if they do land and their knees go in or one knee goes in, which is something I see quite common, is that you know that they're at higher risk because that glute and the hip flexors are a bit weaker or there's muscle imbalances. So these muscle imbalances will then cause that ACL to be at risk because when they want to change direction, okay, and then push off, that's when it's not happy. And remember, it's got nothing to do with trauma from a competitor or a defender. It's actually their body is at risk, okay, because that ligament is very weak. Then we do some foot proprioception tests. So this is all barefoot now. We have designed this barefoot assessment. We call it the piano test. And we just want to see as the child walks whether they have total proprioception and balance. And you'll find, kids are quite off. And the parents are basically saying, yes, it's a checklist. So yes, can walk 10 meters with a pretty good balance, no balance, very bad balance. And then they can then say, okay, that's a risk factor of 1, 2, or a 3, or a high to low risk. And then they'll go from there with the others, and then a collection of them together. We've got hamstring stretches, as we know, for definitely your soccer players. We want to see whether the child can, raise their leg up, and hamstring flexibility and also mobility, okay, in the actual movement itself, puts you at risk. Then we look at some hip flexor, okay, for those, running power movements. Because if you've got an imbalance between the two and also your glutes, things can go wrong. We also do a very simple glute activation. This is probably the most important part we assess with these young athletes is they can't switch on their glutes from standing, okay, and we're talking switching on the right glute with no quad activation, switch on the left glute with no quad activation. That's a huge, huge risk, and there's a total imbalance there, and they don't know how to use their body properly. Then we get them to sit down, and the same thing. Can you switch on your right glute, then your left glute, and so on for 5 to 10 repetitions. And then the last one is in a stationary squat. So can you hold your that squat position, and can you switch on your glutes simultaneously? One thing that's really important as a coach, as a parent, if your child can't do that, there is no-go zone to the next level. Okay, you must encourage your children to know how to switch on their gluteal muscles without any other muscles switching on at that same time, because that's when most injuries will occur in that lumbopelvic region, okay? Because that's where power takes place. Then we've got an ankle mobility assessment where they lean against the wall, and we want to see their range of motion. We've got some groin range of motion sort of flexibility tests, very important for all lower limb sports. It's pretty obvious when you're in that defending position, especially for your basketballers. Postural analysis is really important. So what we find when we're working with these young kids is that they've got usually an anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, we need to understand what a neutral pelvis looks like without squeezing your gluteals, and then know that, sort of alignment between the ears all the way through to your ankles. That's really important because when you ask them to draw their pelvis, they're usually squeezing their butts and pulling their navel into their spine, and that goes all messy. They need to understand that less is more, okay? Once again, it is simply awareness. That's all it is, and it prevents injuries when you're on the park. Another assessment that we look through, and these are very quick, they don't take very long, and that's what we like about it. We're trying to have a look at their thigh strength. So can they hold basically a wall sit in 90 degree angles? Can you hold that wall sit? So it's muscular endurance for your thigh muscles. Then we do a hamstring test. Now this one's a harder one to do, so we've sort of did a bit of trial and error with this one, and we decided to do the one where you're on your knees and someone will be holding your ankles, and you're going to be with your hands like that, and you're going to lower yourself to the ground. And we want to have a look at the rate at which you lower. So if it's a very fast drop, it's like, wow, you're going to be at a risk of a hamstring injury because you can't lower yourself in control. And if you have a lot of control, that is amazing, but very rare in adults and children. So once we've done that, okay, we then look at, are you at high risk, low risk, and so on. And then what we'll do, we might pick a few children in the crowd and we'll say, okay, parents, were your child at high risk? Why? And bring them out here and have a bit of a chalk and talk. If someone's a low risk, we'll have a look and we could compare the two and say, why? Okay, and then we'd say, well, what would you do? And what would be the signs and symptoms if you had an injury? And they'll usually say, I'll be in pain, I'll be sore, and so on. And then we raise the awareness of why we want to avoid that, okay? Because we don't want to not play sport. Then we go through basically a corrective exercise and a pre-game workout. This one we're very passionate about because we find between allied health, and sort of fitness professionals, there's a gap there. So between rehabilitation and being on the park, what happens in between? And that's what this, corrective exercise program is all about. So very quickly, you go foam rolling. So it's like doing a warm-up. We'll show you how to foam roll, how to switch on your glutes. That's another very important one for lower limb sports. Then we show, two versions of glute activation. We call them clams. Then we do alphabets. And this is one I'm very passionate about. We adapted it over time, tweaked it a lot, and we basically do some hip flexor movements for alphabets. And these are simple things that kids can do. Parents can do them with them as well, which is even better. Then we do that ballerina, the hip opener, for balance and proprioception with your eyes open and closed. Then we do some calf raises, very important. So we want to strengthen that Achilles. Remember, for the Sever's disease type sports, your soccers, we want to get that awareness between balance and calf raising, okay? Then we do what we call nerve glides. Now, nerve glides is an interesting one. It's usually used as an assessment. We adapted it as an exercise. And the purpose of a nerve glide is to stretch that posterior chain from basically the back of the head all the way down to your heel. So then when you're running, you're using power, you've got that full mobility, okay? And in this case, your nerves. We do some heel to toe rocks, okay, and that's to get your lower back or your multifidi muscles switching on, and then you start to get that pelvic tilt, proprioception, and that awareness, okay. And then we've got some walking high knees, so now we start to get into power, okay, and then we start doing some running high knees basically, and to get that glute activation and that hamstring power as well, okay. We've got some matrix jumps, and that's where we jump from side to side, okay, so we then start looking at agility. Then we move into some partner workouts. So this is where, if they're at home with a parent or against a football post or with a partner, they're doing high knee running type movements. And that starts to get that power and also that explosiveness into these lower limb joints to then start to switch it on for their game, okay? Then we've got some quick zigzag movements. Which is good for all sports. We can modify those zigzag movements basically on the movement patterns of that sport. So soccer as opposed to netball would be a different shuffle and so on, okay? And then we've got the most important one, and this is why we built all the way from foam rolling all the way to the final one, is that change in direction of power, okay? That change in direction of power is basically the pivotal movement that we're aiming for. So it gives you an idea of how much work's involved for that child to have awareness they can do that change in direction, because we want to protect that ACL. So that is pretty much what we do with the screening pretty straightforward with the parent. We guide them. We have the PowerPoint. We can have some videos as well. And then we move into the corrective exercise that they can do prior to the game. And then the final one is we take them through a basic exercise program that they can do on their own, because we need to remind these children and the parents to some extent is that the child has a responsibility to their own body, okay? And this is what the lens they need to look through. So we do something from foam roller in terms of balance work, okay, very important, laying on your back. Bridge work, so where you lay on your ground, get your glutes switching on. Dead bug, we like dead bugs when you're laying on your back, and the reason why we do dead bugs is to teach that pelvic tilt, so then you can allow your glutes to do what they need to do rather than using your hip flexors when your pelvis is tilting forward. Do some basic push-ups on your knees and understand how to put the elbows and what form of alignment you need to be at, and understanding that we're doing push-ups for our core, not actually for our chest, because we're playing a lower limb sport. And then we do some planks with some knee raises, and then we do some step-ups for basically balance and thigh strength, and also getting your glutes switching on. So that gives you a basic idea of why we want to run these free workshops, is because we've been doing this for a long time, and we feel that we have a responsibility to work with coaches, parents, and these young athletes to help our local community and so on. We do ask you, if you want to get in touch with Fitness Embassy, just give us a call. The number will be there somewhere on these links, and just speak to one of our staff members, and we'll be more than happy to arrange a workshop and come out to work with these parents and so on. If you have any questions regarding sport specificity in terms of your space, if we can't answer it, we have enough connections and networks in order to align you with the right person. But we do thank you for taking the time to view in this video, and we do hope that we come in contact with you and we can do some great things for our community, and we can get some rising stars.